Lucas Brennan had never heard his mother's voice. Born profoundly deaf, he experienced the world through vibrations, through the feeling of his father's laugh rumbling in his chest during their evening hugs, through the way his mother's footsteps made the floorboards creak in a rhythm he had memorized by the time he was 4 years old. The Brennan family lived in Portland, Oregon, in a modest 2-story house on Maple Street. David Brennan worked as an accountant, spending long hours ensuring numbers added up correctly for small businesses across the city. His wife, Jennifer, had been a high school English teacher before Lucas was born. After his diagnosis at 8 months old, she left her job to dedicate herself entirely to him, learning sign language, attending every therapy session, fighting with insurance companies, advocating fiercely in a world that wasn't built for her son. Lucas was 7 years old that autumn, a bright child with sandy brown hair that never stayed combed and green eyes that seemed to notice everything. He attended a school for deaf children across town, where he was learning to read at a level far beyond his age. His teacher, Mrs. Patterson, often told Jennifer that Lucas had a gift for understanding, for seeing patterns in things that others missed. On the morning of October 12th, Jennifer made Lucas his favorite breakfast, pancakes with strawberries arranged in a smiley face. Lucas signed "Thank you" with enthusiasm, his small hands moving with the precision Jennifer had worked so hard to teach him. David kissed them both goodbye at 7:15, briefcase in hand, already mentally preparing for a difficult audit he had scheduled that day. At 8:30, Jennifer and Lucas left for school. The drive took 20 minutes through morning traffic. Lucas sat in the back seat, watching the world pass by through the window, his hands occasionally signing to himself, practicing new words Mrs. Patterson had taught him the day before. They were 3 blocks from the school when it happened. Jennifer would later tell the police she never saw the other car. A young man, 19 years old, texting while driving, ran a red light at 45 miles per hour. The impact hit the passenger side rear door where Lucas sat. The sound, Jennifer said, was like the world ending, a metallic scream that she would hear in her nightmares for months afterward. The car spun twice before slamming into a telephone pole. Jennifer's airbag deployed. She tasted blood. Her ears rang, but she was conscious. She turned immediately, frantically, to check on Lucas. He was slumped forward against his seatbelt, completely still. A thin line of blood trickled from his temple. Jennifer screamed his name, forgetting in her panic that he couldn't hear her. She screamed it again and again. The ambulance arrived within 6 minutes. Paramedics carefully extracted Lucas from the wreckage. Jennifer refused treatment until she could go with her son. At Portland General Hospital, doctors worked quickly. CT scans, X-rays, consultations spoken in hushed voices outside the room where Jennifer sat. David having arrived within the hour, his face drained of all color. The neurosurgeon, Dr. Rebecca Walsh, finally came to speak with him. Her expression was carefully neutral, practiced. Lucas had sustained a severe traumatic brain injury, swelling, bleeding. They had relieved the pressure, but now it was a waiting game. He was in a coma. They couldn't predict when or if he would wake up. Jennifer felt the world tilt. David caught her before she fell. Days blurred into weeks. Lucas lay in room 347 of the pediatric intensive care unit, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed, monitoring every function of his small body. A ventilator breathed for him. IV lines delivered medication and nutrition. Monitors tracked his heart rate, his oxygen levels, his brain activity. Jennifer never left. The hospital staff brought in a cot, but she rarely used it. She sat in the chair beside Lucas's bed, holding his hand, watching his chest rise and fall with mechanical precision. She signed to him constantly, even though he couldn't see her, telling him about his day at school that he'd missed, about the cat that had started visiting their backyard, about how much she loved him. David came every evening after work, staying until the nurses gently suggested he go home and rest. He would kiss Lucas's forehead and squeeze Jennifer's shoulder, neither of them speaking because there was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said 100 times. Dr. Walsh checked on Lucas twice daily. The swelling in his brain had reduced. That was good, but he showed no signs of waking. His Glasgow Coma scale score remained unchanged, a number that meant nothing to Jennifer, but everything to the doctors. On day 12, Dr. Walsh sat down with them in the small consultation room. "The statistics aren't favorable after 2 weeks," she said gently. "We need to discuss long-term care options." Jennifer stood up so fast her chair fell backward. "No," she said, her voice breaking. "He's going to wake up. I know he is." Jennifer's sister Margaret came from Seattle to help. She brought clean clothes, handled phone calls with the insurance company, forced Jennifer to eat when she forgot. Their church, St. Catherine's, organized a prayer chain. Father Morrison visited twice a week, offering comfort that Jennifer wanted to accept but couldn't quite reach. On the 17th day, something changed. Jennifer was signing to Lucas, telling him about a book she was reading, when his right index finger twitched. Just once, so subtle she thought she'd imagined it. She pressed the call button. Nurses came. They checked the monitors. Everything was the same. "Probably just an involuntary muscle spasm," they said kindly. It happened sometimes. But Jennifer knew what she'd seen. That night, she prayed. She wasn't particularly religious, had attended church more out of tradition than conviction. But that night, she prayed with an intensity that surprised her. She prayed to God, to Jesus, to any saint who might be listening, and finally, though she felt almost embarrassed doing it, she prayed to the Virgin Mary. "Please," she whispered into the darkness of room 347, "please bring him back to me. I'll do anything, just please." The next morning, October 30th, 18 days after the accident, Jennifer was dozing in her chair when she felt it. A squeeze, definite, unmistakable. She opened her eyes. Lucas's hand was gripping hers. His eyelids were fluttering. Jennifer's heart seized. She pressed the call button repeatedly, frantically. "Lucas, baby, can you hear me?" His eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then finding her face. Nurses rushed in. Dr. Walsh was paged. Within minutes, the room was full of people checking vitals, shining lights in Lucas's eyes, asking questions he couldn't hear. Jennifer pushed through them to get close to him. She signed, asking if he could see her, if he understood. Lucas's hands moved slowly, weakly. Yes, he signed. "I see you." The next 48 hours were a controlled chaos of tests and examinations. Lucas was awake, responsive, and remarkably stable, given what his body had endured. Dr. Walsh was cautiously optimistic. "The brain is resilient, especially in children," she told Jennifer and David. "We'll need extensive rehabilitation, but this is the outcome we hoped for." Physical therapists came to assess Lucas's motor function. His movements were slow but present. Occupational therapists evaluated his coordination. Speech therapists, though their work seemed irrelevant given Lucas's deafness, checked his ability to swallow, to control his facial muscles. Neurologists ran cognitive assessments through sign language, with Jennifer translating. Lucas seemed confused by all the attention. He signed repeatedly, asking where he was, what had happened, why everyone looked so worried. Jennifer explained about the accident, about the coma, about how long he'd been asleep. Lucas listened, his green eyes serious, processing. It was on the third day after waking, November 1st, that it happened. Jennifer was helping Lucas sit up in bed, supporting his back while a nurse adjusted his pillows. David had just arrived with coffee for Jennifer and a stuffed bear for Lucas. The morning sun streamed through the window, making the room feel almost cheerful. Lucas looked at his parents, his mouth opened, and then, clearly, distinctly, in a voice that was small and unused but undeniably real, he spoke. "The Holy Mary told me to get up." Jennifer dropped her coffee. The cup shattered on the floor, hot liquid spreading across the tiles. David stood frozen, the stuffed bear falling from his hands. The nurse gasped audibly. Lucas had never spoken before. He was profoundly deaf. Speech required hearing, required the ability to mimic sounds, to understand phonetics, to connect auditory input with vocal output. It was impossible, but they had all heard it. Clear as a bell, 7 words in perfect English. Jennifer was shaking. "Lucas!" she signed frantically. "Did you just speak? Can you hear me?" Lucas looked confused. He signed back. "I can't hear you, Mommy. Why are you crying?" David found his voice first. He turned to the nurse. Did you hear that?" The nurse nodded, her face pale. "I heard it." Within an hour, Dr. Walsh was back in the room with 3 other doctors. They examined Lucas thoroughly. His hearing tests showed no change. He was still profoundly deaf. When they spoke to him without him seeing their faces, he showed no response. When they made loud noises behind him, he didn't react. His audiological profile was identical to every test he'd ever had. But when they asked him, through Jennifer's signing, if he remembered speaking, Lucas nodded. He signed his response. "The lady in the blue dress told me it was time to wake up. She said, 'I needed to tell you, so I told you.'" "What lady?" Jennifer signed, her hands trembling. "The pretty lady who visited me while I was sleeping. She wore a blue dress and had a kind face. She didn't sign, but I understood her anyway. She told me you were very sad and that I needed to come back. She said to tell you that she heard your prayer." The story of Lucas Brennan spread through Portland General Hospital within days. Nurses whispered about it during shift changes. Doctors debated it in the cafeteria. The chaplain, Father Eugene, came to visit, sitting with Jennifer and David for hours, listening to everything that had happened. Dr. Walsh arranged for a team of specialists to examine Lucas. Audiologists confirmed again his profound deafness. Neurologists found no damage to the hearing centers of his brain. Speech pathologists were baffled by his ability to produce those 7 words with clear pronunciation, proper intonation, and correct grammar, despite never having heard human speech. One theory was that the brain injury had somehow, temporarily, created a neural pathway that bypassed his damaged auditory system. But that didn't explain how he knew the proper sounds to make, how his vocal cords and mouth formed words he'd never heard. Another theory suggested it was a type of automatism, the brain producing random sounds that happened to form coherent words. But the specificity of the message, the perfect grammar, made that seem implausible. Jennifer told them about her prayer that night, about asking the Virgin Mary specifically. Father Eugene listened with tears in his eyes. "Miracles," he said quietly, "are not bound by our understanding of what is possible." Lucas never spoke again. Despite attempts by speech therapists, despite Jennifer's gentle encouragement, despite David's desperate hope, Lucas remained silent. His voice had been heard once, delivering one message, and then disappeared back into the silence that had always been his world. But something had changed in Lucas. The fear that had flickered in his eyes after the accident faded completely. He healed rapidly, progressing through physical therapy faster than his doctors expected. By Thanksgiving, just 6 weeks after the crash, he was discharged from the hospital. By Christmas, he was back at school, signing enthusiastically about everything he'd missed. Jennifer's sister, Margaret, remained skeptical. "Maybe he'd been learning to speak before, and you didn't know," she suggested gently. "Maybe the stress of waking up made him try." But she hadn't been there. She hadn't heard the clarity of those words, the impossibility of them. The family resumed their life. David went back to work. Jennifer eventually returned to substitute teaching. Lucas played with his friends, did his homework, grew taller. But Jennifer kept a small statue of the Virgin Mary on Lucas's nightstand now, and sometimes, late at night, she would stand in his doorway watching him sleep, remembering those 7 words, remembering the miracle she couldn't explain but couldn't deny. Dr. Walsh wrote about the case in a medical journal, carefully avoiding religious interpretation, focusing only on the medical mystery of a profoundly deaf child producing perfect speech once and never again. She concluded the paper by acknowledging that, despite advances in neuroscience, the human brain still held mysteries beyond current understanding. Father Eugene spoke about Lucas during his Christmas Eve homily, about faith, about miracles, about how sometimes grace breaks through in ways that challenge everything we think we know. The church was packed that night. Jennifer and David sat in the 3rd row, Lucas between them. When Father Eugene mentioned the boy who woke with a message from Mary, Lucas looked up at his mother and signed, "That's me." Jennifer kissed his forehead and signed back, "Yes, my love, that's you." Years would pass. Lucas would grow up, graduate from high school, go to college. He would become a graphic designer, marry, have children of his own, and he would always be deaf. His life would be full and rich, navigated entirely without sound, as it had always been meant to be. But there would always be those 7 words, documented in hospital records, remembered by witnesses, spoken once by a deaf child waking from a coma, delivering a message about a lady in blue who told him it was time to get up. A mystery that medicine couldn't solve, that skeptics couldn't fully dismiss, that faith embraced as a whisper from heaven breaking through the veil between worlds. The Holy Mary told me to get up. 7 words that changed one family's understanding of what was possible. 7 words that suggested that sometimes, just sometimes, the impossible happens. And 7 words that remind us that the greatest mysteries are often the ones we cannot explain, only witness, only accept, only hold close to our hearts as evidence of grace.